affecting a country, because they are only used to just one security threat to government. And in this case, as has been the case with Nigeria from probably independence in 1960, if we want to talk about nationhood, that is majorly the internal security threat to leaders in government. So it's always been the fear of citizens. So, and every security architecture that has been put in place in Nigeria for a long period of time has been about the protection of leaders against citizens. So the reason why it became very difficult for Nigeria, therefore, to deal with the nature of the security risk we are dealing with, is that the architecture of Nigerian security system has never been built to deal with hostile governments outside of Nigeria, which we haven't had any much problem with. The last time we had any threat from an international country, sorry, any country outside of Nigeria, was when Nigeria was very involved with the fight against apartheid. The apartheid regime at the point had to threaten that Nigeria was meddling in its internal affairs, and threatened a retaliation against the Nigerian government. But the nature of the threat we have today fall under terrorism, banditry. We are dealing with proliferation of arms, uh, and we have now also veered into cybercrime a lot, because why cybercrime is important is that in this modern day, uh, we must understand that terrorism is funded a lot through bypassing the regular or conventional financial systems. So cybercrime becomes very important as part of the security challenges we must look at before we understand what is afflicting us. And as a result, we should also take into uh, consideration the issue of cyber terrorism as part of the things that are likely to afflict us in the nearest future. Uh, in the case of Nigeria, it's something that is very, very interesting that people don't talk about, is the fact that the terrorism that started in Borno State has implications regarding climate change. And what is climate change? The Lake Chad, that used to be huge and supports a huge population of person in the country Chad and Nigeria, had dried up to the point that a lot of people that were being supported had to be moving southwards in search of uh, uh, sorry, greenery and hydroponic existence. When I say hydroponic, is water related existence. So part of where the terrorism in Nigeria started from headers in particular, was as a result of climate change that affected the Lake Chad region largely. Uh, and another part of the issue we are dealing with in Nigeria is also transnational crimes. Be a vital area where they could recharge and also stray into territory to fund their activity. So the instability in the nations surrounding us has also caught up with us. So having spoken about all these, national security threats that are afflicting us in Nigeria, it's important that we understand that, as I mentioned earlier, that if you have leaders whose only idea about uh, security is driven by their fear of their own people, they typically don't even want to build an army that can protect the country. I'll give you an example. In 1990, around 1991, I went to visit an uncle of ours. I'm sorry, I have a chest cold, so that's why I've been coughing a bit the last few days. I had an uncle, and I went to visit this uncle of mine at Dodan Barracks, and he took me to a place where the armory where they had the world armored cars. I counted not less than 100 of them, 100 in Dodan Barracks. Not Dodan Barracks. I'm talking about the one in Ikeja, the cantonment in Ikeja. Not less than 100 of them. But because of a coup that took place in 1991, I heard that Babangida, the military president general at that time, who was in charge of Nigeria, demobilized and destroyed most of those armored cars and vehicles that could have helped Nigeria to fight terrorism today. As we're speaking today, because of his own personal interest to remain in power perpetually, he ruined the army. Subsequent governments, especially during the military rule, did the same and left Nigerians without protection and cover from all these, external threats. By the time the internal threats became very obvious and uncontrollable, Nigeria had no capability and ability to fight back immediately. The same Nigeria that ended the war in Liberia with our soldiers and security forces ended the war in Sierra Leone when it was met with ragtag soldiers starting from 2009 could not confront these militants who were riding bikes. Same thing happened to the Navy. By the time those those people in the top echelon of the Navy started destroying the Navy, not because there was a coup. In their own case, it was because of oil bunkering. The Navy officers and their friends in the civilian world were bunkering oil, and because of that, they ruined the Navy. I imagine that that's the same thing that happened to the Air Force as well. You don't want to even think about or talk about the Nigerian police force. The next thing we should also know is that all these national forces then became regional forces. They became forces that became loyal to individuals as opposed to the nation. And because, as I mentioned, their particular personal uh, interest is to protect those in power and their families. And as we speak today, Nigeria's cover has been blown because of all these activities: nepotism, corruption, incompetence governing our security lives. And we're completely today exposed to all kinds of dangers, whether within or without. I imagine that if Chad decide to annex a part of Nigeria today, nobody can do anything about it. Of course, if you heard about incursions into Taraba from the Cameroonian side of the world, where they enter into villages and take over villages and kill people, you know that we don't have any extra territorial protection from even countries like Cameroon, Chad, perhaps Mali, and we've never had anything from Benin, but I imagine that if they try, I don't think they'll find much resistance on our borders. So if you combine that with the fact that we don't actually have real national borders that are properly policed, you can imagine that today the Nigerian case is a basket case. So having said all this, people ask for solutions, and I've always said that in addition to all the threats that are afflicting our nation that I mentioned to you, the greatest threat that is facing Nigeria and Nigeria is that of economic security. When people are not sure of what to eat, how to live beyond one day, uh, they pose a threat not only to themselves, they pose to their neighbors, they pose to their townships, villages, cities, they pose to their nations as well. So most of the people who have become a security threat to Nigeria today are the people that Nigeria has abandoned over the years. I was looking at our education figures today in a small research I was doing and found out that Nigeria only has 1.7 maximum students in our universities. 1.7. Population of Nigeria is 2 point something million. If you have 1.7 million students in higher institutions, what percentage of your countrymen and women are in tertiary institutions? And now you are so unfortunate with leaders. They've closed down the universities and poured on the streets 1.7 students who have nothing to do but be bitter and hustling and looking for survival. You have poured more gasoline into the fire of insecurity. Beside the fact that you have not made adequate provision for proper education for the younger ones in the country, the youth in the country, because this is just ridiculous that we're talking about. I think the percentages will be hovering around 0.7% of the population of Nigerians in higher institutions. You can do your Google search and compare what other countries, some countries like Cuba, is doing in that regard, and you'll be ashamed of yourself. But when we talk about insecurity, we just talk generally about people, arms proliferation, small time criminals, kidnappers. We don't look at it holistically from the point of view of where our insecurity problem started from. That they have policy dimensions, they have leadership dimensions, they have dimensions that have economic uh, dimensions to it. And there's also what most people don't even have never thought about, which is the climate change dimension to insecurity, which I mentioned with regards to the Lake Chad region, which used to sustain a huge population of persons who are fishermen, who are herdsmen, and people who have access to water. And water is a big deal when you're talking about sustenance of life on Earth, who have been forced out of that region in search of what to do and what to eat. So the final one is, of course, all of these have international dimensions that as post-colonial states, a lot of our former colonial masters also have interests in our security, well-being. I would say maybe not well-being, but security in which they have serious influence, which is dictated by their own economic and transnational interests. So there are countries that have been destabilized by Britain, America, France, just because the people or the leaders of those countries, but in Africa in particular, do not subscribe or subjugate themselves to the authorities of these former colonial masters. So you can't also rule that out, that some of these problems, including supply of arms or non-supply of arms to countries under security threat, are generally also coming from these former colonial masters with very interesting, in some cases, very evil agenda against the continent of Africa. So I just want to dabble into solutions very quickly so that you can probably take questions. And I have broken them into three, and I've spoken about this a lot. That our first is how to immediately arrest the situation that's on our hands now. How do we push back against all these threats that we have confronting us? And as radically as I've spoken and revolutionary as I've spoken, that in Nigeria you don't have, a head of state that you can also refer to as the commander in chief, because the commander in chief of the armed forces is the person that leads from the front, not someone who issues press releases or press releases every day, or he issues morning statements, or who make empty threats. Because the leaders of any country, and the confidence even their army and security forces have to defeat this kind of threats are largely based on the confidence they have in the leadership that is running the country and the armed forces in particular. I have said it that all the people that have been running the war against terrorism in Nigeria in particular are doing it for business. Boko Haram has become big business until you have people who are committed to eradicating the threat of terrorism in Nigeria through international cooperation and national conditioning of the armed forces to make them understand that they have a duty and their leaders are loyal to them just as they are loyal to their country, and they are dying for the country, not the country sacrificing them to the criminals. You will never be able to defeat these guys. Like someone mentioned when you started your introduction, that some professor said yesterday. I mean, the army said yesterday it would take 30 years to defeat terrorism. They're not lying. Any kind of terrorism in any country or armed conflict, for that matter, that have lasted more than 10 years, do not end in a hurry. But what end them sometimes are the kind of leaders that are elected. Because you look at countries like Colombia, They also had armed conflict, but at the point, they had leaders who went out there to fight the armed groups, and there are some other leaders that came out and used other tactics. They called them to meeting, they had conversations. While they had their army on standby to push them back, they also reasonably discussed how to solve some of these problems, and in which case they get to understand what exactly is the graphs of these armed groups and what they could solve and bring out of those amongst them who are reasonable they did. Those who are not, of course, uh, they meet their Waterloo where possible. So that's number one, is that we must immediately have, make efforts to join hands with anybody we can find to push back these guys honestly, to fight against terrorism, fight against the banditry that is ravaging the country. Banditry and terrorism, by the way, are not different, but you need a commander in chief who is capable of doing that, and that's why I don't see this thing ending under these fumblers who are in power today in Nigeria under the APC. The second effort is a medium term goal, which we include training, proper recruitment of our security forces, realignment of the role of various security forces in the country. I believe very strongly that policing, the Nigeria police force, must be redeployed back to doing police work and not to be sharing food at parties or doing VIP protection work, as you have seen happening, that degraded the police. The police is nothing more than anybody you can walk into their station and hire a whole of them. You can hire guns, you can hire their vehicle to protect you. I'm sure in so many cases you can actually go and hire guns and vehicles from police to go and carry out crime, and you share the loot with them, and they'll behave as if they didn't see you. So there must also be intelligence sharing. You must have an office in place of national security that understand how to collect intelligence, share them, and ensure that they're effectively enforced. Those are medium term, and part of medium term is also to start working on how to deploy technology, and long term is to working on having a smart armed forces where where necessary we deploy machine instead of men, so that we reduce casualty uh, on the war front. But the moment we eradicate terrorism, in the case of Nigeria, it becomes easier for us to build our economy, revive agriculture. I'm not in any way referring to saying that without solving this problem that you cannot solve the problem of hunger. Of course, that's not true. It's just an excuse, and I'm not here to offer excuses, because technology can do a lot of the agricultural development we have now, but because people are more important, I mean, more interested in those in government, more interested in driving SUVs and buying tractors. You can't have modern agriculture. So, and then to develop the Nigerian armed forces to be able to compete globally, the same way they are doing even in African countries today, where they have developed capability to fight all these kind of threats, and to have in place finally a solid national security uh, agenda that deals with how to police our borders, how to have a homeland security policy in place to identify our real citizens, technologically and biologically identify them. Talking about identity of citizens now, such that we can identify who amongst us are not here to do good. This is not a one, uh, you know, there's not one solution that defeats terrorism completely, but it doesn't hurt if we have a solid identity system that let us know who our citizens are and who they are not. And when we collect biometric information, it is to identify easily criminals when they commit crime once, and when they do it a second time, to be able to use biometric tools to locate them. So I know this conversation could take longer than this, but this is what I'm able to offer you within the short time that I have decided to give this speech today. And I thank you once again for inviting me. If I can't cover anything today, I'll be glad to come back anytime that you may request my presence. So at this point, I want to thank you, and I yield.
Thank you so much, Mr. Omoyele. We really appreciate you for coming. Okay, with us, we have other speakers. We have Dr. Ogeneruna Ewere Charles and Mr. Emmanuel Nwombodo. Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me, Mr. Emmanuel, sir? Please,
Yes, very clearly, very clearly.
thank you, sir. Doctor,
I can hear you clearly.
oh, thank you so much, sir. Okay, we'll be heading straight to questions now. I hope Mr. Omoyele will be around to take a few before heading out.
Yes, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. Um, One of the first record of a bomb blast in Nigeria was recorded in 2009 in the northwest region of Nigeria. But can we safely say that was the genesis of Nigeria's insecurity status today? I would appreciate if Dr. Ogenewuna goes first. I don't know if you got my question.
Yes, I got your question. Go ahead.
Okay, sir. As I asked earlier, can we safely say that the genesis of Nigeria's insecurity status today started as a result of the recorded bomb blast of 2009?
Would that be for me? You say you're going with Dr. Organev first.
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay.
Dr. Ogeneuna.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be part of this conference. I appreciate the time. In fact, the speech by Yele has been so inspiring. I learned a lot of things from him. Well, the bomb blast in 2009 cannot be said to be the genesis of our insecurity. Um, if you take it from two dimensions, the issue of climate change and the consequent security implications that he mentioned. We've had this farmers crisis in the north, where the Fulani herdsmen, let me generally associate with Fulani herdsmen, having issues with feeding their cows, over the time. We've had it in the north. It shows that the importation of that crisis started in the south, much earlier, Then if you cast your mind back to the emergence of Boko Haram in Borno State, it predated that period. When their leader, Yusuf, was killed extrajudicially by the Nigerian police, with a view to nipping a problem in the bud. They thought that's an easy way to solve the problem. But unfortunately, that sowed the seed of Boko Haram insurgency that, metamorphosed into rearing more dastardly acts by their followers who took it upon themselves to now, take it to the extent of planting bomb, because insecurity, as it were, is they use a weapon of fear. But the moment you are able to seed fear into the heart of the people, then you've achieved your result. You achieved your aim. So the bomb blast in 2009 is just a manifestation of a seed, evil seed of insecurity sown in the past. So that's just a manifestation, not just the beginning of insecurity. And if we take it to the aspect of our governance system, insecurity, we use it most times interchangeably. And it has a lot to do with how people are managed. If you narrow it down to analysis, you can see from how justice or equity is mismanaged. If governance is properly handled in a manner that all you need is met, you won't have problem with who is who is the president, who is the vice president, who is the senate president, or as you may whatever you may have, but because our minimal requirement of safety and provision is not catered for by those saddled with responsibility of governance, you see people struggling to provide for themselves. And by so doing, because of the resource scarcity, you have the possibility of crisis. If we have a government that is responsible, for instance, owing to the climate change and the need for herdsmen to feed their cattle, and we have a definite law that makes it possible that, oh, this is your private business, go into private ranching, give them support as the case may be, they won't have issues crushing on farmers' land to the extent of resulting in a crisis. Or at the moment Boko Haram emerged in Borno State, they did not emerge for the fun of it. They emerged simply because government was not responsible enough to meet their basic need altogether. So it cannot be said to be the beginning of insecurity. It can only be said to be a manifestation of a bad seed sown in the past due to two things I can pinpoint at this point: bad governance, which failed to provide for all and sundry, and the manifestation of climate change, which led to the drought in the north, upper north, in Borno. I happened to be in Borno at a point where I saw a vast land, literally deserted due to lack of rain, and made it possible for people to even fend for themselves. I can give you an example. In Egypt and Israel, part of Israel, they don't have land, they don't have water, they don't have the regular rainfall that we have. But they leverage on technology, irrigation farming. They have all the food around the year. So if you have opportunity, you have good governance that can identify our challenge and be able to deploy the appropriate tool of governance by coming up with appropriate policies and governance mechanism to ensure that most of those shortfalls are taken care of, we won't have crisis. I don't know whether I'm able to respond to your question.
Yes, sir. Thank
Stop
you
that.
very
Yes.
much, sir.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
so much, sir.
Yeah.
Over to you, Mr. Uwombodo. Please, you have 3 minutes, sir.
All right, thank you. I think I would love to start off by appreciating each and every one of you. I mean, the host and, of course, the president for putting up this very critical platform. I do not take it for granted. I mean, in the current state of our nation, it's very fundamental that we have discourse like this. The question you asked, of course, let me commend my co-speakers as well, Yele and, of course, Dr. Agarawa. It's a pleasure to listen to you both discuss on issues. I mean, very brilliant submissions. The question you asked was in relation to the compounding security, if the bomb blast was the genesis of it. Of course not. The bomb blast was not the genesis of it in 2009. I mean, far back as 2001, thereabouts, I think we had Obasanjo declaring a state of emergency in Plateau State. I think, let me just start off this way. I think Nigeria, by its very design, is one that thrives naturally on insecurity. So I think we are not bound to expect anything less. I'll tell you why I say this. You see, I strongly believe that since we had what we call this alleged dividends of democracy, right? It has failed in its very essence. It has failed in its very essence. And of course, I strongly believe also that the government, in one way or the other, has been complicit in the insecurity of this nation. And so I say so because, you see, when you look back in history, and of course, when I talk about history, I'm talking about from the time, of course, the time I started, I was aware, started reading newspapers and all of that. You find out that there's been a thread of insecurity occurrences. I think it was a bit the reason why we probably did not have the government in the military era witnessing the whole bomb blast and all of that is because they themselves were the threat to the average Nigerian citizens, right? And so down to democracy, back to when we had the dividends of democracy, the state of emergency, which was declared in Plateau State, spanning down to when we had the bomb blast, and of course, the insecurity that came up in the Niger Delta region. Of course, what you also have up north, currently ongoing, tagged to the Fulani headsmen, is just a symptom of the many facts that speaks to the essence of the fact that we are in dire need of a restructuring, basically, and that's what I believe. So it's not just the 2009 thing; it's more of a system failure. And the reality is, the sad reality is, everybody, even the government, sometimes, of course, are clothed in this reality. I think the Wall Street Journal reported recently, was it last year or 2 years ago, that Buhari was to fly to a particular part of the country, of course, Castina, and the Air Force had to negotiate with terrorist organizations for his safe flight. You know, I think about 20 million ransom was paid, $50,000 was paid. This was, of course, the Nigeria Air Force came out to debunk it. But if you even have a commander in chief, if that be true, the report according to the Wall Street Journal, if you have the commander in chief of a nation as being part of the victims or allegedly part of the victim of a security failed architecture, you do not expect anything less. You do not expect anything less as an ordinary citizens of this country. So I think it's more of a system failure. It's more of a system failure to me. And this system failure is nothing less accumulated. That to me, that report from the Wall Street Journal, I mean, negotiating with bandits to say, please just allow the president to safe land, you know, if that be true, it's just like a pastor negotiating with witches in a particular community to successfully host a crusade. So in itself, you have even the security personnel trying to strive for their security. And whenever you find that in a nation, it raises a lot of question as to what makes up that nation in the first place. And so it's diverse, and this doesn't touch on just the federal government alone. It has eaten deep into every part, every look and cranny of where we find ourselves. Today, in today's reality, it's instructive to mention that, I mean, in Nigeria, it's actually more dangerous to be a student, perhaps a student union activist, than a cultist. Yes, that's the sad reality. And that is not to know, I mean, to not doing of Muhammad Buhari, because I mean, it's a student union activist is an endangered species, but a violent cultist out there is a more protected entity. So it gives you an idea that you have a state that is quick to label people like Sowore, people who demand for the rights of the average citizenry, right? They are quick to label those who demand, who fight for the rights, as terrorists. In the bid to address insecurity. Sowore, Sunday Gulu, and the likes of many others as terrorists. And um, those who have been, I mean, the terrorists in quote now, who are perpetrating terrorism acts, are labeled as businessmen, those trying to negotiate with the government. They have a goal they are trying to achieve, and that is why they've indulged over time in the crimes or the terrorism acts they have perpetrated. They are perpetrating rather. So you have a system that encourages it in every sector. In the university sector, the university system is one that would contract even your mother, if possible, as a student union activist. It's everywhere. You have a police system that is deliberately understaffed to keep them on leash, deliberately untrained to keep them on leash, so they can be able to perpetrate the will and caprices of a selected few people. And so just to summarize all the question you asked, to land on the question you asked more properly, the security, but Nigeria by its very design was designed to fail insecurity-wise from ab initio, from the very beginning. I mean, since when we brought up this alleged democratic practice, some people call it's not full democracy. There's nothing like full. There are no shades of truth. A truth is the truth, no matter what the way you try to paint it. So I think that answers the question. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wongoto. Over to you, Mr. Sowore.
Well, let me delve a bit into history so that the younger ones will understand the history of bomb blasts in Nigeria. Bomb blasts in Nigeria in recent history started in 1986 when the current man in Mina, Ibrahim Babangida, sent a letter bomb to a journalist, Delegiwa, that killed him. It started with the military. After that, in 1994, under Abacha, they sent a bomb to the home of a pro-democracy activist, Dan Suleiman, a retired air commander. After that, in 1995, there was a bomb blast that went off at the Loring Township Stadium during the launching of the family support program that was led by Abacha's wife. 1996, a bomb went off in Kaduna that killed a journalist, Bagwada Kato, and a female hotel manager. And then it's believed that one of Abacha's sons died in a bomb blast and a plane crash as well, also in 1996. There was a bomb blast in Malam Aminu Kano Airport when also people were there to condole Abacha over the death of his son. A bomb blast happened at the Muritala Mohammed International Airport in 1996, killing a pro-democracy activist, or one guy that was suspected to be close to pro-democracy activist, who was the chief security officer of the airport. His name is Shola Omar Shola. Then, in the 16th of December 1996, there was a bomb blast that targeted the convoy of Marwa, who is now the current chairman of the NDLA. So I could go on and on so that you guys understand that this thing didn't start currently. But when you look at the security in Nigeria, don't forget that it wasn't in 2009 that it started. If maybe we should limit it to the last 20 years, when during the advent of the so-called democracy now, you discover that probably the first set of people that started carrying arms against the government were the members of the Odua People's Congress. Although they didn't use sophisticated weapons like bombs, they did openly confront the government in a guerrilla format before they were suppressed. And after that came the Niger Delta militants. And you know the history and the story. A lot of killings of military officers, a lot of bomb blasts, bank robberies. Before Boko Haram came into existence in 2009, like someone has mentioned, all these things are happening mostly by official collusion. The ones that I reeled out in the 90s, it was the military that were either bombing themselves or bombing civilians, because they had, just like you have factions in the cult gang system, you also have factions in the military. And they're always trying to outdo themselves. So I've spoken about inequality, I've spoken about economic insecurity, but what is the worst thing that's happening to Nigeria today is a conspiracy of the elite against the Nigerian populace. And until it's understood as such, and the populace can rise up, see beyond their nose, fight back, this will continue to happen. Again, don't let me forget to thank you guys for putting this up. Don't be discouraged, because if Nigeria were to be working, all the presidential candidates are supposed to be here tonight to have a conversation as important as this. When the US is having presidential elections, there must be a debate in at least one or two universities historically, where students and lecturers are present to ask intellectually stimulating questions and add to the conversation on how their countries are supposed to be ruled. The only time there's a semblance of bringing up of presidential candidates, which was yesterday, they made sure that some of us were skimmed out because it had been compromised and arranged for certain candidates who the leadership of the Nigerian Bar Association were cozy or in bed with. I'm sure they specially requested that if they want them to attend the NBA convention, they should not allow someone like me to be sitting with all these guys who have destroyed and failed Nigerians. And I would have confronted them. I would never lie, because any opportunity I have, I will expose and confront these guys. Because the crimes that they committed against Nigerian people is a crime against humanity, and they must be addressed wherever we find them. So on this note, I want to thank you guys. I don't know if you have more questions. I was listening for a little bit more, but I've definitely run out of time. I was going to devote 20 minutes to this, but we had such a stimulating discussion that that has lasted for some 50 minutes now, but I don't regret it.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Actually, thank you very much for your answers, Mr. Sowore. We actually do have a lot more. We have three more questions. If you would please stay with us. Let all the speakers please limit the answers to just 3 minutes for the want of time. So our second question is: the porosity of Nigeria's sea borders that give room for crude oil theft is one of the state of insecurity that is under discussed. What could be the factors surrounding the nature of this topic, and what could be done to help discover more loopholes and fix the loopholes in this sector? So we'll be going the same way we went. Dr. Ogenero will start first for 3 minutes, then Mr. Emmanuel, then Mr. Amoyele.
Thank you so much. It's really getting hot. I think the one thing we probably need to understand is the issue of citizenship. Not citizenship in the literal sense, but citizenship in terms of identification. From colonial times to the post-colonial era, we've not had success trying to define who's a Nigerian. And because of that, the national question still lingers. To what extent can we say we are Nigerians? To what extent do we have the capacity to participate fully and optimally in nation building business? To what extent can we say we are Nigerians and willing to make sacrifice? So the colonial government created the dichotomy between the civic public and the primordial public. And that manifested in the post-colonial state, where the civic public represented the public space, government, and all that, and the primordial public representing our nativity, religion, tribe, and all that. So, and we were unable, unfortunately, to blend, to find a middle ground where you can identify as a Nigerian. And that dovetailed into the kind of governance that you have. So if you have your brother from the Niger Delta, for instance, who is in government, your expectation, your primary expectation is that, oh, you benefit from government. It doesn't matter whether you are competent, whether you have anything to offer. As long as you have one of your kinsmen or kinswoman in government, you expect to benefit. That's the kind of dichotomy that the post-colonial state, created, and thus denying us the capacity, the possibility of having a Nigerian. And it's only a Nigerian that is patriotic can do things selflessly to build a common state that we can call a commonwealth that benefits all and sundry. And because we lack that opportunity, people go into government to do certain things, do all form of things to ensure that that commonality, the common ground that binds us together as citizens, is denied. So corruption, inefficiency, acute inefficiency manifested in governance can be rubbed on our face without any consequences. So when you go into government and you are not meeting the needs of the people, they are bound to react. Let's take some instances for take some cases for instance. The Niger Delta crisis and the consequent amnesty program that was embraced by the government were simply because of, to my own understanding, I stand to be corrected, but I have a firm knowledge of the Niger Delta environment, where the chunk of the resources that sustains the nation was, it was and still being harnessed, but they live in squalor until individuals who were initially moved by the sole aim of ensuring that they have equity in the governance system of the country. It did not start with the Niger Delta militancy of 1999 up to 2007. I know most of us must have read about Adakaboro and the Kaima Declaration. Is a legendary period, is a legendary history of deprivation and abandonment of the people who have a genuine stake in contributing to the Commonwealth. How did that feed into the civic public and the primordial public narrative? Because majority of the Niger Deltans were not in government, which is the civic public, they were left to suffer. Their environment was left to be degraded without adequate compensation. Assuming the merging line is blurred to the extent that you do not have the civic and the primordial public, there would have been a common provision for all and sundry, whether you are from Niger Delta or not. Altogether. So what am I trying to do? How does this feed into the insecurity narrative? Simply, it fits into when you see with the prism of the fact that those in government, they do not have the common interest of the civic public. Rather, they pursue a narrow interest, which is the primordial public. That's why people who retire way back from the civil service can be brought back into juicy contracts, juicy position of government with no accountability. That's why you can have termite eating so much money without accountability. So the security problem is embedded deeply in our governance style, which flourishes in inequality and injustice, largely.
Thank you very much, sir. So moving to our second speaker, Mr. Wombodo, and a brief recap of the question is: the porosity of Nigeria's sea border has given room for crude oil theft. What can we say are the factors that caused this problem, and how can we help solve the problem in that particular sector? Over to you, Mr. Wombodo. 3 minutes, please. 3 minutes.
All right. So the porosity of the sea borders, I think if we're talking about the factors that cause the problem, I think we should start looking at the indices of, first and foremost, like I would always say, a government that is complicit in the problem in itself. And I do not mime words. I do not mime words to say that. Because first things first, I mean, let's take a little bit recap about the Jonathan's administration. Yes, we had the Niger Delta guys coming out to say, okay, well, which is normal by the very failed design of our nation. It's normal for them to come out to say, well, you cannot exploit our oil to the development of a particular part of the country. So we need a sort of an equitable distribution of what we produce, right? The pollution was taking place there, but at the same time, they were never beneficiaries of the dividends of those exploitations. So they came out. The Jonathan administration negotiated with these guys, and it seemed quite peaceful. But to date, there is still that exploration of oil. Now, I'll take you fast forward to some of the personal experiences the former Minister of Finance had shared. She has had the opportunity. I've had the opportunity to listen to her, and she also shared it in one of her books, "Confronting the Oil Scammers: Fighting Corruption is Dangerous." It got to a stage because of, I mean, of course, the elites, the security, of course, their personal interests. It got to a stage where, while she was narrating her ordeal in office, where the oil marketers in the Nigerian oil industry had to hold our mother for ransom in exchange for some documents or for some monies that she felt was fraudulent and she never approved. She narrated how that ordeal went out in her book, published on the national, on air. It was everywhere. She narrated the ordeal of how these oil scammers were, at the end of the day, some identified. But you guess what? Till date, we still have some of these guys managing the oil architecture of the nation. So the government is totally complicit on it. As of how many days ago, this was about last week ago, we had a contract given to someone in this nation, what alleged contract, let me put it that way, given to someone in this nation to earn 4 billion naira monthly to secure the oil architecture in the Niger Delta sub-region in relation to tests and all of that. 4 billion naira monthly worth of contract. You look at some of these things and you look at the person's antecedents in question that was given this contract to. He's someone who was obviously, from his records, a militant, so to speak. Some of the gangs leading some of these oil ordeals, according to various publications, in the Niger Delta sub-region. So what happens when such a contract runs out of expiration, even after this government? You have a government, the first problem is you have a government who aids and abates these things to happen. And that is why the leadership of this nation is very fundamental, because everything rises and falls on the leadership. So you have a government that aids and abates the oil thefts. They are aware the amount of crude that has been stolen. They are aware. They are aware of where these crudes go into, how these thefts happen. You have a government that is totally aware. What we are in is like, it's like the Squid Game movie. If you've seen the Squid Game movie, it's like the Squid Game movie. We are all in a squid. We are just we are not even citizens, but we are all playing a Squid Game where the plot twist came as the player number one. If you remember, who was in this sense the government of the Nigerian state playing along to be a victim of the Squid Game, but was actually just using everybody as a bait for his pleasure. That's what we find ourselves. So the first issue is the government they understand how the theft is going because they themselves are responsible for the theft. So by responsibility, it's both figurative and otherwise literal. When I say responsible, when you do not provide the adequate, there is no adequate redistribution of what is being gotten from the state to that state, down to the local government level. Of course, when people are pushed to the wall, they are prone to react. So in a figurative sense and in the literal sense of being responsible, they are complicit in this. And so as a solution, I think we need to define it. It's not, when we say oil theft, it's not literal, it's not theft. It's not okay. We can say it's theft in the context of it is being stolen, but I think we need to redefine our narrative of what theft is, right? So you say something is theft because we feel it is being taken by fellow citizens like us. No, the government is responsible, and by as a solution, I think we need to, like I said initially, we need to look at how we can regig the structures of this nation. Restructuring has to be brought to the table. That's one thing I applaud the Goodluck Ibeli Jonathan administration for. He tried his best, the Confab project, although it failed, but there was some effort in that light to say, okay, come together and tell us what you want as a nation, what you want as a people. We do not have that. The 1999 Constitution we have is just an offspring of Decree 4 of the military coup. So I think restructuring in its broad sense will curb all of this, because you want to say you keep negotiating with these guys, you keep giving out contracts to some militants to safeguard the oil pipelines. Believe you me, no matter how much you abate, you pamper a virus, it will continue spreading. You can't tame cancer. And so this can only be likened to a cancer that's eating. So it continues to eat because Nigeria is at its inflation point, and we need to address it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Over to you, Mr. Omoyele. Mr. Omoyele, are you with us?
Yes, you're going to let me declare that this will be my last intervention. I have to go after this. I want to correct one impression that the last speaker spewed out here about Okonjo-Iweala and her false claim that her mother was kidnapped by oil marketers. It's not true. Her mother was kidnapped by the kidnap of her mother was arranged by a a, a cousin of hers that was living with her mother. They're the ones who contracted the people that came to kidnap her. She uses that to gain accolades, and I think it is in the interest of justice and history that we correct this kind of lies, because the oil marketers in Nigeria did the best under Jonathan's regime. I don't know what they are doing under Buhari now, but I'm sure they're also doing very well under the Buhari regime. But that whole oil theft business, on the scale that it was happening, did have that level of success on that Jonathan regime. In fact, if you recall, it was after there was an Occupy Nigeria action on which year was that, in 2012, that the regime came out and declared that there was oil marketing or oil importation fraud going on tonight. Some of them who were involved are still under trial to today. Some of them has gotten away and walked away with their billions in theft. But like I said before, the theft and the scale at which is going on in Nigeria today of oil theft is completely with official collusion. I don't know if you guys read some 3 days ago about an oil barge, I think it's from Norway, that had over 300,000 capacity or thereabout, that was lifting oil from Nigeria, and there was no official information as to where it was lifting oil from. And when the Navy and the Nigerian security system went after it and asked it to stop, the barge refused to stop. They had to contact Equatorial Guinea to help them stop the barge, and the barge is currently detained in Equatorial Guinea. If you are stealing 300,000 uh, barrels of crude oil per day from a country, you have to have, official support. In this case, that kind of support level must actually be in the villa, the presidential villa, and without resolving that official collusion and putting in place a strong navy that can police our waterways with helicopters, drones, and good navy boats, we are deceiving ourselves. And if the navy is involved, the army is involved, there's no way this will not continue to happen. And I believe they are involved. So on this note, guys, I actually have to run. So my answer to this question, I have carefully chosen to be as short as possible so that I can go to my next meeting. But again, thank you so much for having me around. I hope to see you again.
Thank you so much, Mr. Omoyele. We really do appreciate. Thank you. Though we wish you stayed a little longer, but thank you so much, sir.
Okay, we would move on to our third question. It goes, we have had discussions bordering around corruption and insecurity on different media channels, but insecurity keeps ravaging the country despite the fact that it is no secret that there's a high level of insecurity in Nigeria. Where did Nigeria miss it? And how can we fight insecurity? So we'll be going the same way we have been going. Doctor will go first, then Mr. Owobode will go next. Please, 3 minutes. Please keep your answers to 3 minutes. So back to you, Doctor.
Thank you for the opportunity to respond to this. Well, security affects all of us in terms of practical impact. Our daily life is negatively. Insecurity doesn't have any positive impact, to be frank with you. We are limited in all fronts. I doubt how many of us are still willing to travel. Those of us down south travel from Abuja to Benin, or down south, or those in the north travel from Abuja to Kaduna. The ordeal of our compatriots who were kidnapped on the train on Abuja Kaduna Road is still very fresh on our mind. So we are limited on every front in case of insecurity. But how do we quickly address security? That's the question. First of all, we don't have a nation. I want to say that from a convinced point of view. Those of us in academics, especially in political science, we believe that the foundation of any nation building is patriotism. And until you lay that foundation well enough, you'll just be scratching the surface. We do not believe in Nigeria. That's the fact. That's the fact. Until you see Nigeria as your own. I'll give you a typical analogy to drive home this. Assuming you are driving a car that you didn't buy with your money, it doesn't belong to you. You can afford to drive recklessly. But if you had labored and you sweated out to buy that car, you will take care of the car. Because of the crisis between the civic and the primordial public, we do not have a common ground. We do not see Nigeria as our own. So those benefiting, profiteering from the insecurity malaise that we are in, quagmire that we are in, they will continue to do that because they do not have any love and any attachment to the Nigerian state. So quickly, how do we handle this? First, we must be able to revamp our nation and achieve nationhood that we can be proud of. Americans are proud to be Americans. American man can kill himself to ensure that America is secured. But how many of us are willing to go to the nearest bush to arrest terrorists? We can't, because what has Nigeria done for you? You will not be willing to risk your life because of Nigeria, because you've got nothing of Nigeria in you. The Nigerianness in us is just a fantasy that doesn't have any substantiation. So the moment we are able to create that platform that gives us that identification, identity in Nigeria comes with prize and benefit, then we'll be able to fight insecurity. By so doing, we'll be able to evolve a government that is responsible enough to wield the big stick of punishment. Those of them benefiting from this security, they will know them. We read of stories of a former head of state whose private helicopter was being used to elude bandits in Sokoto, in Zamfara. What happened to it? We have seen gun runners in the military. As we speak, the armed forces is politicized. Those on the religious line are on the religious, those on the ethnic line are on the ethnic line. Until we are able to purge ourselves of the primordial and sectional interest and see Nigeria as one. Because when you go back to PPAK's theorization of the civic and primordial public dichotomy, he said that the civic public can be killed to satiate the primordial public. That's exactly what we are doing. Until we stop the identification with the primordial public and dwindle the influence of the primordial public, the civic public will die a natural death like we are doing. So the first way we can achieve security in Nigeria is to ensure that we have a Nigerian we can be all proud of. You know, I like the line of thought by our brother Elwumbudo, who said restructuring. Restructuring, yes, restructuring gives you opportunity to identify with your region. We can start with that. By so doing, we must be able to discard the framework of sectionality and come together as a Nigerian. You meet an American in New York, you say, I'm an American, but I'm based in New York. He has the same right in Texas. He has the same right in Washington. He can go to Utah to contest for local government, for position in government. He will not be limited by his place of birth. But you can be born in Surulere, But the moment you are from Anambra, you don't know, you can be born and bred and raised in Surulere, but the moment you are from Anambra, you cannot contest for councillorship in Surulere local government. So we do not have a country yet. Until we have a country, before we can talk of love for the country that can be strong enough to kill our craving to involve in acts that can jeopardize our collective security. So we must be able to evolve in Nigerian that we can call our own. Then every other thing will start following. It may not be immediate, but that is a sure way to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that insightful answer, sir. Over to you, Mr. Nwobode. 3 minutes.
All right. Thank you so much. Sorry, could you recap the question just very clearly?
What the question says is there has been a lot of insecurity in Nigeria. The
Right.
story has gone over and over all over the media. So exactly where did we miss it? And what can we do to solve this problem?
Okay, so I would want to take your questions from the line of your expectation. You said exactly where did we miss it? The question is, I think the question ought to be, I understand you asked that question based on an expectation of the fact that there is in the first place a nation, but I think the question ought to be the fact that is Nigeria built for security in the first place? You know, I love what the very silent answer the last speaker just gave. It just answers everything that I would have wanted to answer in this for this very particular question. And so missing it, I think, has to start from the conception of the way the very design of our nation. And believe you me, that design was just done deliberately to favor a selected few. We used to think because I mean it's stereotypical for us to think that, oh, it was designed to favor a particular part of the country, and so we always called it north, and the part of the country was north, and the north comprises of even the middle belt, right? But now it extended to, in the middle belt you have the thieves and of all other tribes. So now it was extended to just the Hausas and Fulanis, and today it's just the Fulanis. And it has even moved beyond that to a particular class. Because I do not think it's more of it's favoring just a particular people anymore. It's a particular class, you know. So you have the Yoruba man who is also favored by the system. You have the Igbo man favored by the system in a particular class, not a particular category of people, as the case may be, in as much as you also have those categories of the people. Now, so the first things first about addressing insecurity. Like our brother said, the doctor said, he said, you need to inspire patriotism. I think that is very fundamental. You have to be able to inspire patriotism, and you cannot inspire patriotism without quality leadership. Because like I previously said, everything rises and falls on leadership, and you cannot, the effectiveness of your work in any space of your field of endeavor can never rise above your ability to lead in that endeavor. And that is what is the reality in the Nigerian state. So we've had leaderships that do not understand that, one, we need to regig our nation because they do not love the nation in the first place. A leadership that has weaponized poverty, illiteracy, and of course, religion as a tool to put us apart. So you look at these three factors, we are all disunited as much as we claim to be united. We have these stereotypes within ourselves here. Like the doctor rightly said, we have the stereotypes. So the Igbo man says, "I'm from Anambra State." Oh, I'm not from the north. Oh, the northern man says is the Igbo man. The Igbo man says the problem is the Yoruba man. These are things that have been weaponized by these guys to keep us where we are. And the tragedy is, when you travel out, when you understand the way the international community sees us, they see us as one. You are not seen as no, I'm not Igbo, I'm not Hausa. When when you travel out, you understand that we are seen as one. So we've been, I feel, basically having a nation in the first place that can inspire patriotism amongst ourselves and, unite us than it has always divided us is the first key. I like to bring it to a more practical aspect. Secondly, I think we need to educate, educate, enlightenment. It's very key. Enlightenment. We need to be able to understand that the children who were kidnapped in Jonathan's administration has the same ripple effect by in any scale of preference, even here in the South. The average Northerner needs to understand that the people who were killed in those churches were humans as well. We need to have that unifying sense of belonging, amongst ourselves. The government has failed in its objective to have a data analysis because I feel like that solves a lot. They came out with the name scam. Let me not call it a scam anyway, but they came out with the national identification number. And I know how that would have solved, I mean, if not 50, let's say, reasonably 45% of Nigeria insecurity's problem. So what do you have obtainable in the United States? You have a social security number that identifies you to the very core of your existence. You cannot do anything without your social security. You're filing your tax, you're doing all of your expenditures. They track your everyday movements with your social security. We do not have something as basic as that. No unified identification system for every Nigerian, And so you're not able to identify what is going on in the system or what is not going on in the system. And even those that have been identified in question, the UAE came out to give the Nigerian government list of sponsors of a Boko Haram. Till today, nothing has been done about it. Recently, we had the news that, of course, the 193 companies listed as those funding the terrorist attacks. Nothing has been done about it. So it boils down to the fact that even at the scale of understanding or having a knowledge about who is perpetrating the crime, these people are not being punished because, one, the government is complicit. And of course, that results to their selfish interest. It's born out of their self-interest. Then secondly, it's also born out of the fact that we like the initial speaker said, we do not have a nation. Of course, that we do not have a nation when the rule of law is applied differently to the same situation depending on who is involved. So, as a message to address, just summarily, we need to inspire. We need to have a nation in the first place. Educate, and by education I mean inspire patriotism. And I think finally we can now come to the remaining part of just having the security walking freely out on the street will become a dividend of these two things I just mentioned. When you have a nation and when you're able to inspire patriotism for that nation with people who are enlightened, and when I say educate, I'm very deliberate about that word education because a lot of us like to, call these things happening in Nigeria as pro-democracy struggle. It is not pro-democracy struggle. I don't believe so. It's not a pro-democracy struggle. This is it should be more of a liberation struggle, right? And that struggle can only be born out of our ability to understand what it is, understand the problem for what it is, and address the problem for what it is, which is taking the clue from what Doctor said. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, sir. Okay, lastly, before we take one or two questions from the audience, is Nigeria's insecurity right for foreign force aid, seeing that we are unable to make any major changes for years? So is it time for us to invite external bodies? Over to you, Dr. Ogeneruna.
Thank you. There's this. I'm a village man, so I grew in the village, and normally, as Africans, we pass messages by using adage. let's assume you live in a community and there's a rat in your house. The first attempt is to try and exterminate the rat before you call your neighbor. It's only when it becomes evidently difficult for you to do that you can invite your neighbor. We have not done enough. We have enough capacity to nip our problems in the bud. But we have a lot of things in abundance. The only thing we've not had, or we elect not to have, is truth. We have not told ourselves the truth. We know the truth, but we have chosen to look the other way around. And as such, until your neighbor, using my analogy, sees that you have actually made a practical effort to kill that rat, and the rat is beyond your capacity, before your neighbor will take you seriously. We know where our problem lies, and we have shied away from the problem for too long. I will take a cue from Iman's comment while he was responding to the previous question. He mentioned the fact that we have laws that are capable of addressing everybody equally, but the same laws are applied to the same situation differently. I will give a typical example. We have heard of Kabiru Sokoto and his escapades as far as the security issue is concerned in the Nigerian context. He was given a miserable 4 years jail sentence. And this guy, Evans, kidnapper, was given a life sentence. What is why the discrepancy in applying the same law? You know, so until we ask ourselves critical questions, we had national conference in the past where some people with sense of entitlement came to a national conversation. Conversation in the first place is supposed to be truthfully done. We had a similar experience in South Africa where they have the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. The essence is to heal the wounds. We've offended ourselves in the past. Let's come back to the negotiating table and discuss on a way forward. But some people came with the capacity to undermine the national yearnings for a true conversation with a view to betting a system that works for all. But rather than seeing to it that we discuss frankly and come up with a solution, we decided to go primordial. So my own point is we've not done enough. So inviting anybody will make a mockery of the whole essence of the very need to solve our problem. We need to go back to the drawing board. Are we enjoying the system equally? Do we have the same equity? Is there equity in governance? Do we have equal stake in the Nigerian state? Who is more Nigerian? How together? I did a paper that has been rejected, not because it is not good, but because of the revelations that I've done in that paper, and entitled "The Nigerian Governance and Equity in the Nigerian State: The Niger Delta Crisis Revisited." What am I saying? I had a rare privilege of, itemizing who occupies what in NFPC, who occupies what in the oil industry, and juicy parastatals within the Nigerian context. And you see that people from a section of the country dominate. And in the absence of injustice will prevail. And when injustice prevails or flourishes, it leads to insecurity. So these things are set in motion. The moment we establish government based on injustice, with a tilted patronage system that favors some against the other, you have insecurity as a natural consequence. So we have not done enough. We've not asked ourselves critical questions. We've not been able to go back to the drawing board and say, oh, this is where we have gone wrong. This is how we should be able to mend our fences as people, wearing our human heart to address our challenges. So calling others from anywhere will mean that we are not serious in the first place. So it will be likened to you calling your neighbor to come and kill the rat in your house when you don't even have a broom or even raise your slippers to kill the rat. Your neighbor will say, you are not serious. You have a rat, you are calling me, you have not done anything. Am I your slave? So we should be able to do it internally. It's only when it's obvious that we cannot help ourselves, we can then call in mediators, those who may not have interest in the crisis we are going through, because our the colonial links that we have, they don't even want us to survive in the first place. Let's not go into the political economy of dependency and all that, which is not within the framework of our discussion. But until we're able to look inwards, it is not appropriate to call in anybody from anywhere in the world to come and help us solve our problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, sir. Mr. Wombo, over to you, sir. 3 minutes.
All right. Thank you. I think Dr. Charles' answer is very, very apt, very profound. I personally, I also hold the view that you cannot, we cannot at this stage. It's just practically impossible when we've not done enough. I mean, it's normal for us to have that inclination for us to invite third parties at this stage, but there is still a lot more. I mean, you also have to look at the legality of that by the current occultic document binding us as an alleged nation, the 1999 Constitution. Amongst other factors, the legality of that might not be able to thrive. But at this stage, I think it's primordial. It's natural that we need to. The best bet currently at this point should be we voting, we coming out in mass to fight to ensure that our voices are heard, right? And we have to do that through our abilities to establish our franchise. I'm glad about some of the revolution taking place in the Nigerian space currently by the youths. It may not count currently, but it's going to count in the long term, because I believe we can consolidate on that effort. And a lot of us saying that, oh, well, it's not necessarily about leadership or having just one person cannot solve the problem. It's important that I take us back, reflect us back a bit. It took just someone like Ibele Jonathan, in as much as his administration had a lot of pitfalls, admissibly so, to have that sense of belonging that we need to restructure this country. And he placed up the CONFAP project, the CONFAP conference that brought together Nigerians to say, this is what we want and this is how we want to be governed. However, that failed. I think it's just a pointer to the fact that one person can actually push for it to make it work, in as much as that has failed. So the security in itself, having external presence. First of all, I believe that these external guys, they've played a fundamental role in where we are today. Of course, the West, of course, they've all. When you look back at history, the where we are today, even the African space as a whole, beyond being Nigerian, the West has played a fundamental role in where we are today. Some of, like the UAE, same UAE that is always coming out to, for instance, give us list of people who are corrupt who are sponsoring Boko Haram, have some of the assets of these sponsors in their country. The US coming out to, I cannot imagine how the US came out recently in 2010. The Congress was indicting one of our political aspirants. The Congress indicted Atiku Abubakar, that Atiku Abubakar laundered XYZ amount of money into their territorial boundaries. And the same US, who once placed a ban on a travel ban restriction on him, had to, will I say, break that ban for about 4 days thereabout for him to visit, because they saw that should he become president, they don't want to be at war with Africa's most populous nation. So this Western influence in the first place, I have my reservations about them. In as much as yes, they can it can be instrumental to the betterment of this nation, but at the same time, I think it's a struggle the struggle is more on our part, and it's not just on any part, but on we the youths, understanding that we are dealing with a system where our humanity is discounted, and those who are meant to protect us are the ones haunting us. We need to Man, we need to wake up and smell the coffee and come out to just keep fighting. Because you look back at history, one lesson we have to, if you have to learn the lessons of the past, you have to be able to define the future. And one lesson we have to learn from history is that when this nation was couched, most of them who were the heads of states were in their youth age. Muhammadu Buhari, Anthony Enharhuru, who raised the motion for the amalgamation of this nation, was in about his 30s at the time. You know, a couple of them, they were in their youths. But today they are still recycling themselves because there is always that purification to distract us with the youth. So we are more concerned about the BB Niger. We're more concerned about doing Shetima challenge, but not basically a challenge to demand the government to account for the victims of the train station, to account for ASU strike. What are these? What are you saying? What is being done today? To account for certain things that have been left unaccounted for, to account for the termites that have eaten up the documents of what billions, And so it's a compoundment of many things. But I feel at this stage, like I've rightly opined, we just need to come together as one, unite our voices, have a common goal, a common interest, educate, very fundamental, educate. The average Northerner should understand that he shares the same bloodline, he has the same heart pumping in his chest as an average Southerner in the east or in the western part of this country. Have a common goal, a common purpose, and let's educate ourselves to demand this nation from those who are stifled our sense of belonging out of existence. I feel we can get it right if we choose to go in that direction. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Would open the floor for one or two questions from the audience. Is there any question for Mr. Nwombodo and Dr. Ogenekaro? Just signify and the host will, you request to be a speaker and then you ask your question. Are there any questions, please? If there are none, I'll pass it to Comrades Ini Stephen, who I call my president, for his closing remark.
Yeah, good evening. Uh,
Good evening.
yeah, I'm Muhammad Yassin by name. Can you hear me? I hope I'm clear, right?
Yes, sir.
Uh,
Yeah, just go on.
all right. I think the speakers have been, eloquent and reasonable. You understand? They have been able to, you know, expatiate on the problems that face us as a nation. You understand? So I think they have made some reasonable statements about the issues that we are facing and how the youth, you know, is being distracted, like the last speaker said. The only thing that most of us are like, bothered about is Big Brother Ninja and the rest of the trends. You understand? While politicians and leaders continue to do, their own thing, that will benefit them. So, my questions now are, okay, our problem, the issue in Nigeria is we know our problems. You understand? We analyze our problems so well that it becomes like a song. But what are the solutions? You understand? This is our problem. What are the solutions? What are they offering? What are your recommendations on the way forward for us, for the youth? Youth constitute the most important, you know, of national development if they are really, really involved.